Welcome to Hardcore Divers Gear Locker. This week we're going to talk about dive computers, and we start from the very most simple and work to more complex to give you an idea of which of these that you may want to purchase and use on your dives. The first kind of dive computer that I ever learned how to operate with was our dive tables. These tables are a simple scalable device where I can find out how long I can stay at depth, and when doing repetitive dives, what my saturation level of nitrogen is and how my surface intervals have to factor into bringing my nitrogen load back down for a subsequent dive. These tables is how I learned. If you learned a decade or more ago, you learned on dive tables. They have tables that are for air. They have tables that are for nitrox or enriched air. And so they try to cover the gamut on how to help the diver keep their nitrogen load down. But that's all these do. And so you would need other features or other things to help you dive. When I first started diving, I used a 3-gauge console to help supplement my dive tables. They didn't tell me what my nitrogen load was, and they didn't tell me necessarily how much dive time I had left. They basically just told me very simple pieces of information. At the top was my compass, very important piece of gear for even the newest diver. You always want to shoot your azimuth out, and of course, the reverse of that would be your azimuth back to safety, to shore. So even just knowing that simple thing of how to get back out of the water is important, and the compass helps you do that. The second gauge on here is my depth gauge. So it shows me what current depth I'm at, and it also locks in my deepest part of my dive. So that helps me when I'm figuring out how long I have to stay out of the water before a subsequent dive. I may think I'm only diving to 80 feet, but maybe I drop down to take a look at something. This records my deepest part of the dive, and I use those with my tables in order to determine when I can next go in the water. And finally, the bottom gauge of this is the air pressure gauge. It told me how much pressure I had left in my tank, in my cylinder. So I had to have 3 gauges and a set of tables when I very first started diving. But even with these 3 gauges, I still needed one more gauge, if you will. I had to have a dive watch. So these gauges do not tell me what my dive time is, so I need a dive watch to be able to determine how long I was in the water. Finally, you'll notice none of these gauges are computers. They're pretty much all analog with a watch. So the next evolution in dive computers was digital. And this was important for a number of reasons. One is, now instead of using our deepest depth and assuming that we were at that depth for our entire dive time, now we have something digital that can calculate a slope. So if we're down at our deepest depth for 5 minutes, as we come up, the computer automatically adjusts our dive time at that depth. It'll automatically determine when we're getting close to going in what's called deco or decompression mode, so we can avoid that if we're not trained to do that type of diving. And so it allows us a longer dive while still being safe. Now the puck computers, which this is a wrist computer, but some of these computers can pop out of the wrist mount and can be put in one of these slots in the 3-gauge console. That's what I did with the Uatech puck computer. Once I started diving a computer, I got rid of my depth gauge. I pushed a puck computer in there. It did its thing calculating my depth and my dive time. But the puck computers on their own can now also talk to my cylinder, and they do that through this transducer, which senses the pressure in my cylinder and sends a relatively short distance signal to my computer on my wrist in this particular case. The next computer I personally purchased this was also a Risk computer, but much bigger. I can put much more data on this. I can get much more information rather from this computer. I can flip the screen up or down. In this case, I have it flipped this way because I took off the wristband and I put it on a retractor so I could pull it out and look at it. The downside to this particular computer was it's in tones of gray and black. That can sometimes be hard to see underwater, especially in low light conditions. But it did give us a ton of information. It tracked thousands of dives and it talked to our cylinder through one of those transducers. It was a great computer. We really liked them. The next computer that I personally purchased was the Scuba Pro HUD. Very small computer, has everything that this gives you. I can monitor multiple cylinders. So if I want to monitor my partner's air in the water, I can flip to their cylinder with push button and rotate type of signals to my computer. It will find everything I need. I can set that computer up for various oxygen mixes. And the great thing about this HUD is it takes up a small footprint. It's always on my mask. You'd be surprised at how little you see this while you're in the water unless you're looking for your numbers. Once you look up at it, then you can see your numbers plain as day. They look like a billboard about this big in front of your face, and they're color. So it's really nice. I can watch a line, even if I don't look at my numbers, I can watch a line on one side of my screen that is green, 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 yellow, and then red when it comes to the pressure in my cylinder. And I can also do that with dive time. It also has a built-in digital compass. And I never trusted the digital compass as much until I got the Scuba Pro HUD. I did buy the very first version of the Scuba Pro HUD, and it had a couple of oddbally things, and I sent it in to have the firmware updated. It's now a much better product. The computer works much better, and if I let the batteries run all the way down to nothing, I don't have to send it back to Scuba Pro to have it repunched. So that's kind of a nice thing about the newer upgraded firmware and the newer Scuba Pro HUD. So the final type of computer that I would like to talk about, and I only looked at diving these recently, and that's an air integrated computer. So it's really kind of nice. It does everything these other computers do, but instead of having a transducer, it has its own hose going back to the first stage to keep track of the air pressure. These things disconnect with a quick connect, and you can put them in their own little case to protect them. That's a nice variant that I like to use. Some divers really like to use them, but they're not bad for new students. So if your shop can afford these for new students, it's a good option. Let's talk about price points. Price points for these go from very inexpensive, can pick them up all day long on eBay or whatever. They're pretty inexpensive, and these tables are relatively inexpensive. So I can probably set myself up with this for $100, $150 maybe. The next step up, a puck or a wrist computer that can talk to a transducer. Those transducers are usually a couple $100, and the computers themselves can be $400 or $500. The Scuba Pro HUD, the next step up in my evolution, that's a $1,200 dive computer. You can sometimes get them on sale down as low as $800, $850, but that is probably the most expensive computer you'll buy. But for me, it's the last computer I'll ever buy. And finally, the air integrated computer, I'm seeing these for about $700 or $800. So they're not inexpensive. However, these computers are your life safety. They keep you from getting close to no decompression limits, and they can also extend your dive time. So for the price, over the long haul, the more advanced computers are well worth your money. Make sure you look us up at Hardcore Divers. If you need any of these products, or if you want to try one of these products, just come by and see us. If you want to purchase one, go to our online store at hardcoredivers.net, or give us a buzz, push the WhatsApp button, get a hold of us. We'd be happy to help you.